Okay, now it's time to see the fruits of our labor. We're going to go ahead and launch this template, and in the process, see the process. So let's go ahead and get started. So I've got my template here. I've got it all done, ready to go. I dressed it up some. No, I didn't do anything to it. So if you followed along up until this point, as long as you've typed what I've typed, your template should be valid. So the next step to launch this is we are going to go to the AWS console. And in the AWS console, I'm going to go to the CloudFormation console. And that's just under management and governance. And inside of here, once it loads, we're going to be on the stack screen, and we're just going to choose create stack. And remember, a stack is just a group of resources that have been created from a template. And so here we are on the first screen, the specify template. So how do you want to give it the template? Well, either we've made our template, or we want to use a sample template for learning, or we can try and use the template in the designer. Now, we're not going to go into the designer at all, just primarily because I never use it, because it just adds another layer of complexity to something that, it just doesn't need it. And in terms of giving it a template source, well, you can already have it in an S3 bucket, or you can upload it. Now, when you upload it, it is going to put it in an S3 bucket in your account for you. So it just kind of skips a step here. So I'm going to go ahead and choose my template. I'm going to grab this here, template.json, open it, and there we go. Now, if you have really simple JSON syntax errors, so like maybe you typed an extra comma or double quote, it will catch them here. It'll also catch some really simple errors, but that's as far as it'll go. And I say that because as we've talked about with different updates, if something's nested in a template, it's not going to catch it till it starts building it. So anyhow, we'll click next, and there we go. You see, we already have an error, unrecognized resource type of resource. Okay, and so this is what I mean by when I say the errors are so sparse that they're almost sarcastic. Let's try and figure out what that could be. Well, what do you think it is? Well, it's this. It's obviously the fact that we have an invalid resource here, type of resource, and we can see that in there. Now, this is what I mean by when you're going through this, typos and smaller things like that, if you don't catch them and aren't aware of them, the console is not going to give you, too much direction. So now that I fixed that, let's go ahead and upload it again. Just the same process. I'll click next, and now we're into specify stack details. So the stack name, well, this should be pretty obvious. It's just whatever you want to name it. So I'm going to call it security. Well, if I can spell here, security stack. And the stack name is going to be what your stack is called, but it's also going to be used to generate unique identifiers. So for example here, for our security group, we don't have to give it a group name. If we omit this, then AWS CloudFormation will name it for us with a combination of what we've named our stack, what the logical ID is, and also just a random physical ID that they've come up with their own. And then the next section, this is the neat section. These are those parameters that we made. We have that param allow SSH from range pre-filled with the default value, and then we have param author name. And this is really neat because this is what makes CloudFormation almost like, making your own little mini service inside of AWS. And when you combine that with that metadata thing we talked about from the template anatomy first video about how you can style this area, you can really make this look like it's its own custom service. So I'm going to just put in my name here and go to next. All right, so stack options here, tags. If you've worked with AWS at all, then you see these everywhere. It's just extra data that you want to put onto whatever it is that you're making. Now, the neat part about this, the tags in context of CloudFormation, is whatever we put here, it's going to add that tag to every single resource that's created from this template. So I'm going to just add one called learn CloudFormation, and then I'll add that there. For permissions, so by default, when you launch a CloudFormation template, it's going to just use your user. It's just going to use your user. In this case, I'm logged in as my AWS DevOps user, so that's what the permissions are going to be bound for. But if there's a number of users working on the same template and the resulting stack, you may want to limit those permissions. You may want to make sure that when people are launching templates, they're not launching things that they shouldn't. And instead of putting those directly on a user, or you can just make a custom IAM role and use that to constrain it. So then we get down into advanced options. Now, advanced options, the first one here is called stack policy. So when we upload a template here, everything is game. We can change the security group here, and if we had a bunch of other resources, those are all candidates to be updated, removed, replaced, deleted, and the like. But if you have something very sensitive in your template, say like a database, well, you may want to make sure that that's never deleted, replaced, or edited ever. Well, that's what you can do with stack policies. Now, stack policies follow the IAM resource policy format, so they look a lot like bucket policies if you've worked with S3. They have a little bit of a different syntax in the way that you have to point them to tell them about different resources. We're not going to dive into stack policies simply because if you have sensitive resources inside of your template that you don't want ever changed, honestly, the better move is to just pull them out into a separate template. That really is the safest and cleanest option versus having to manage a whole nother set of policies here. Okay, and so then we have rollback configuration. And by rollback, it just means when building stuff fails, what are we going to do? Right? Well, by default, it's going to roll your stack back to what it was in its previous state. Now, on a first-time launch, that just means it just deletes it pretty much, but that's what that's for. So that's how it works by default, but you can add other things that trigger a rollback. So you can create custom CloudWatch alarms that watch anything that you want to, and tell it that if one of those alarms sounds an alarm, to just roll back the stack. So there's a lot of different use cases for it, so many that it's almost not worth talking about because there's a lot of different ways you can do it. That all being said, the default rollback of just rolling back when it fails to create or update is generally clean enough. So next we have notification options. And if you've worked with this simple notification service, so SNS, you know that you can push out things like you can make it so that you have a topic that will then notify or kick off a Lambda, an SQS queue, send out an HTTP request, email, anything. And what you can do is you can make a topic in SNS, give it to CloudFormation right here. And as it's going through creating your stack or updating a stack, it will push those events to SNS and you can get them through your email, text message, or pipe them to Lambda or SQS and the like. So obviously we're not going to do that because we would have to dive into SNS. Okay, and then stack creation options. Here we see the default rollback. So what happens when updates or creations fail? Well, right now it's going to roll it all the way back to its default behavior. You pretty much want to leave this on most of the time. The only time that I turn this off is if you've never worked with a particular service that you're coding in CloudFormation before. In that case, it can be really helpful to leave it as disabled so that when the stack fails, you can investigate and see why it failed. Because if this is enabled, you're not going to have the time to look at why it's failed because it's going to immediately delete all of it. So by default, it's going to just let this stack creation go on until it knows for sure that it fails. But, if you're impatient, obviously there's other cases, but if you want to, you can set a timer on it and just mark it as a failure if it takes too long. And then finally, we have this termination protection. And even though they make this sound like this is some big, super secure wall to put in front of your stack, all this termination protection does is that if I have this enabled and I want to delete my stack, I have to come back in here, click disabled, and then I can delete my stack. So that's all that does. So let's go ahead and move forward. So here we are at the final part, the review page. So nothing crazy here, just your typical review page. The one thing I do want to point out that's really neat is this estimate cost. So since we have a CloudFormation template that has everything in it grouped together, you can actually click on this link and it will give you a cost estimate. Now, since all we have is a security group in here that is not going to cost a thing, obviously our monthly bill is going to be estimated at 0. But if we had an instance in here, for example, we would get a description or an estimate of what that bill would be. Okay, so that is everything here. The only other thing on this review screen that I'll just mention really quickly is you can create a quick create link, which will just give a link you can give to someone else and it will spin up this whole process with your particular template. And that's what I mean why it's kind of cool that you get to make almost like your own little mini services. Okay, and so with that done, everything looks good, and we're going to click Create Stack. So it's going to go through here, start creating everything. And you're going to see here why I chose the security group as our learning grounds, primarily because it can make them very fast. So in this screen, now that we've got this going in our stacks, we have a number of different things we can take a look at. The events areas, which you're going to mainly be looking at, and the events area is telling you about what it's doing. So it's started making the stack, it's in the middle of making it. If we refresh, we can see, oh, it's already completed it. You can go to stack info and get different information about what you've done here, the different settings that we chose, the resources. Oh, look at that. It'll actually give us a link to the resource itself, any outputs, which we haven't covered yet, the parameters and what we put in, the template itself, and then change sets, which we don't see any yet because we haven't tried to update this stack yet. So even though this looks like everything is good, let's make sure that it actually did what it told us it did. Did it actually make this security group? Well, let's go to resources and click on the security group and see if it made it. And it's going to take us over here to the EC2 console. And here we go. We see the security group made that we wanted to make. And we go to inbound, we can see that it has our HTTP and SSH rules. If we go to tags, we can see our learn CloudFormation tag, and we can see a number of other tags that CloudFormation has added for us. So the logical ID, the stack ID, and then the stack name. And this is how it helps group these together. And it's also how you can use the resource manager and the systems manager to find different resources. Okay, and there we have it. I'm actually going to go ahead and just delete it, because when we delete it here, it's going to do all this for us, just this one nice little location. It's going to tell us what's happening. It's already done. In fact, if we go over here and refresh, it's gone. And this is why this is so clean, because with all those resources here, you don't have to worry about stepping on other one's toes. And there we have it. We have launched and deleted our first stack. It's nothing to write home about, but now you've seen the whole workflow. The details will change, obviously, but this process of making the template and uploading it is the general workflow, no matter how large your templates might get.